You're listening to the Value Blueprint podcast, the show where we talk honestly about what it takes to grow and scale a business. I'm Shayla McLean, and joined with me is my co-host James Grieve from Value Driver. And we're excited to be joined today with our guest, Zahid Gani, co-founder of Two Oceans Ventures. They specialize in partnering with businesses owners to steward their business into the future by acquiring, operating, and growing an exceptional BC business. Welcome, Zahid.
Thanks,
And
Shayla. Thanks, James. Oh,
yeah, welcome. Great to have you. Perhaps you can start by introducing yourself to our audience and sharing a little bit about Two Ocean Ventures.
yeah, of course. Well, firstly, thanks, Shayla and James. Really appreciate you having me on the show. I've enjoyed getting to know you both and how you support business owners thinking about succession. And I'm always grateful to share my perspectives. So as you mentioned, I'm Zahid, one of two co-founders at Two Oceans Ventures. In terms of who I am, I'm just a person who loves business and community, and I quit my job to acquire, operate, and grow one exceptional business. Um, Prior to doing this, I had a few roles. They were all focused on business and growth. So worked in consulting at the Boston Consulting Group for a few years. Before that, I worked in growth capital, and I started my career at KPMG, where I got my CPA. And Two Oceans is essentially a vehicle we created to buy one business here in BC. It's led by a friend and myself. We raised capital from investors to support our acquisition. And as you guys really know, there are so many business owners in BC who don't have a clear succession plan or approaching retirement age. They may have hoped that their kids were going to join the business or may have not thought about succession at all. And as they near retirement, we see an opportunity to keep those businesses in Canada, continue to grow them, and keep jobs in our communities. I think everyone knows how important that is, especially in the current geopolitical climate. So we're excited to be a part of that solution for Canada and our businesses here locally.
Well, that's incredible. Thank you for sharing.
Zahid, we're so excited for this uh, episode. Shayla and I were talking before we came in here because quite often we work with business owners who are positioning their businesses for growth and or sale from a seller's perspective, right? And they may not necessarily be selling their business at that point, but ultimately, the minute you start a business, you should be preparing for optimizing it so that one day you will sell it in some way, shape, or form for transition. And, the risks inherent with that. But what was really exciting about this and looking forward to, having this podcast, and of course, all the conversations we've had with you in the past, but is from a buyer's perspective. And just wanted to capture your thoughts on what excites you most about small to medium sized businesses and the thought of buying one small business and owner led business in BC.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's many things to like about running, leading a small, medium business. I think there's the community aspect of it. There's the ability to drive impact. There's the problem-solving active side of it, and then there's also the people.
Hmm.
So I'm sure, as you both know, SMBs are the backbone of the economy. They account for like more than 99% of businesses. And realistically, these are the businesses that are supporting our communities. They're engaged locally. They're having an impact on everyone around them. It's difficult to understate how important they are and just the ability to have impact, work with the people in the community, and then also help people with problem solving. I think every small business owner knows that every day is different. You're problem solving, you're trying to figure out what's next. I think it's just exciting place to be a part of.
Absolutely. And you're right. It is exciting. There's just so many different sides of it. With a business thing when you're building it and when you're looking to acquire one. And, I'm sure that you've talked to a lot of business owners yourself, Sid, and your business partner. And what are some of the risks or hidden risks that, the business owners you've talked to don't always see when they start the succession conversations in preparation for talking to people like yourselves who might be interested in acquiring?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's one of those questions. It's like, how long is a piece of string?
Right.
Um,
Right.
so like business, you don't know. And if you could show me 10 different businesses, it's probably 10 different things.
Mm.
But I think the biggest thing and the most prevalent is people don't think about the timeline. I think people think that, hey, I'm going to sell my business. I'm going to put my business on the market 6 months later. I'm A for away and I'm out of the business. And I think sales can take anywhere from 12 to 36 months to go from start to finish. And I would say 12 is rare. It's probably more to be like 24 to 30 months. That's the norm. Um, And I think a lot of people have experience buying and selling houses, but not a lot of people have experience buying and selling businesses. And you think about a house, you need to make sure there's no structural issues, there's no cosmetic issues, and then prepare it for sale. And a business is no different, but it's more complex, so it takes longer to get all of those things done.
100%. Yeah, for sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
No, it's an ecosystem, right? You just mentioned that there's all these moving parts and it's dynamic. Just to pull on the thread of the, talking about having a home for sale. Well, you buy a vacant home, but in a business, you're actually taking on the people that you mentioned earlier. That's an important asset. The goodwill, the customer base, all those type of things are just so important to consider. And as you mentioned right off the hop, the externalities of the environment, business environment, are changing almost daily right now, right? So to keep your fingers on the pulse of that's really, really important. When you look at some of the business owners you're talking to, and from an acquisition perspective, what are some hesitations when you're having conversations with them, and they're looking to be acquired, or from their side, their succession conversations, but from the lens of talking to someone like you, what are some hesitations they may have when talking to you from what you're seeing?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think there are a lot of what surprises us often is how often things like fit, relationship, and competence of the buyer are more important than price. So we've seen business owners, they're willing to adjust expectations if they really like a buyer, or if they think the
Mm,
buyer has good industry experience, or they think that this is a good values-driven person that shares their values. And we've seen scenarios where owners just don't want to sell to certain people because they don't think it's the right person for their business.
mm,
And from what we've seen, and there's a few reports on this, I think price is like the third most important thing that business owners think about. But really, what they care about is what happens to my people and my business once I'm gone? Who is going to be the steward of this business? And then how does this impact my legacy? So, am I continuing on a legacy, or is this business that I've worked so hard to build, I don't want to say going to be destroyed, but is it going to be able to continue on in the way I envisioned?
absolutely. And legacy is such an important part of this. I'm glad you mentioned it. As a matter of fact, today I had lunch with a colleague, and we have a mutual friend who has a trucking company, and a large trucking firm was going to come in and purchase them, but it was going to result in them laying off 60 of their employees, and he shut the deal down immediately, and just because he couldn't sleep at night. And the statistic is that 70% of business owners that do sell their business, and most people don't consider the legacy piece fulsomely, they regret selling their business because there's other unintended consequences. In some cases, all the employees might stay on, but it might sell to a not a good fit, as you mentioned, right? So it's just so important to take all that due diligence into consideration. You bring up some really good points there, and it's a perfect segue to what Shayla, you were talking about earlier, and she's going to pick up on here is the due diligence of the buyer's side. So, I think this is great.
Yeah. And I think you raise a good point. I think I would add to that. Like, ultimately, if you are selling a business, it's not like you're going to sell a business for 50% of the price to someone that's going to continue a legacy. Usually it's like 90%, 95% of the highest price. So it's really that 5 or 10% difference. But business owners are not selling their businesses at huge discounts to take care of legacy. But they are often not taking the highest offer because they care about these things, and they care about the people that have been with them for, in some cases, 20 years. And you want to make sure those people are going to be looked after. Like you mentioned that 60 people are going to be laid off. It's hard to walk away from a business knowing that you had a good outcome and everyone else had the worst outcome.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for that. And yeah, like James said, I want to dive into this kind of buyer's due diligence checklist, if you will, of kind of understanding what, business owners can prepare for, because it is a little bit more about just the numbers. And, looking beyond that, what would you say kind of outside of the financial numbers are, 3 to 5 maybe things you look for in a targeted business that you're looking to acquire, or at least curious about learning more?
Yeah. So I think four things come to mind that we would look
Uh-huh.
for, like outside of financials. So the
Uh-huh.
first is, where does the actual business sit? The other things we want to ensure we understand is, how does the business create value? What external market dynamics are they exposed to? And then really understanding the culture. And I'll go through each of those in a little bit more detail. So
Yeah, absolutely.
where the business sits, What that basically means is, does everything go through the owner, and it's really the owner, the business sits with the owner, and then they have a whole lot of people supporting them? Or is this a business that sits with the business? So there's a sales team that owns sales relationships. There's a operations manager that owns operations. There's an accounting team that owns accounting. And the more federated everything is, the more comfortable you get with when you take over this business, it's going to continue as is. A business that everything goes through the owner, it's very tough to acquire. And it's purely because you don't know where something is the owner's relationship or where something is true business value.
Right.
Um, the other thing I mentioned, how businesses create value. Sometimes it can be very obvious and sometimes it can be non-obvious. But just making sure, if you can simplify how the business creates value and what it is doing to maintain its position in layman's terms, you should be able to understand what its competitive advantage is and how, and you'll be comfortable with the business's longevity. There's of course market dynamics. Over the last, I think, 18 months, we've all no strangers to market dynamics and the external forces that shape them.
Yeah.
So making sure we understand like what market dynamics is this exposed to, what is happening in the industry, what external factors are in play. Are you exposed, current environment, how much cross-border exposure do you have with the US? And are you on a, let's call it, industry or product that is at risk? So if you're in the steel industry, that's hugely at risk, hugely topical. But if you're in something else that's sort of more under the radar, maybe you could accept that. And then I think the last thing is culture. Um, is this a culture you want to work in? Is this a culture that will respond to the way that you will work? What will resonate with the team? What will not? Will they get along with someone that has me and my values? Um, and I think it's not necessarily a right or wrong thing. It's some people have certain ways of working, some people have certain experiences, and sometimes that resonates with the team and sometimes it doesn't. And I think it's important to be honest about that because you could end up buying a business where you alienate people, and it can be very difficult for you to get people to buy in.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, those are all really great points. And I'm curious, just asking, expanding on your second point there about kind of, how they're getting their revenue streams from. Is there a model that's more attractive for a buyer, like say, product or contract based versus like reoccurring revenue streams? Or are you looking at how diversified their offerings are? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think it's always recurring or reoccurring revenues would always be more attractive because you don't need to have a sales team that's going out and pounding the pavement to drive up new business. So certain industries that are more project based are much more difficult because oftentimes it's the owner who has relationships, maybe they have a sales team, but you need to rely on your ability to make that revenue come in once you transition the business to you. Um, in businesses where there's reoccurring revenue or consistent demand, it's much easier for you to go in and be comfortable with these established relationships will continue to order from me or buy from me or use me as a service.
That makes sense. No, I appreciate you expanding on that. And I'm curious too, because I imagine now you've gone through a few kind of the process of acquiring a deal, only to have it maybe kind of fall through at the last minute, or you've been in the industry enough and have seen different things happen. What are kind of like? Is there a common thing that you've noticed that can cause a deal to close at the very last minute? Or are there like trends that way as to that get are kind of hidden and come out towards the end?
I would say no. I think all deals that die for very different reasons.
Mm,
But the reason that they die is because there's a breakdown in trust.
mm,
Because ultimately you are building a relationship with the buyer. In my case, I'm building a relationship with the seller. Um, and there's going to be things that come up in diligence, both good and bad, that you weren't expecting. But how you communicate with the seller, how you build that relationship, and how you clearly clearly relate to them that we're going on this journey together, and you're asking all these questions that can feel intrusive at times. If the trust eventually breaks down, the deal will break down. But if you continue to operate from a place of trust and know that no one no one was out to get anyone, no one was out to trick anyone. These are just things that come up in diligence. I think everyone will be comfortable and you'll get to a successful close. But I think the reason trust breaks down, multitude of reasons, but it always comes down to a breakdown in trust.
Yeah, that's a great insight. And, looking specifically at maybe like trades and manufacturing, what operational kind of gaps are you seeing most often?
Yeah. So I think it's interesting. I think we'll talk about manufacturing business,
Uh-huh.
but we often see legacy processes and procedures that haven't been updated for the last 15 to 20 years. So a business owner may have built a business, the business has grown and grown and grown, but you haven't really gone back and revisited what worked for a 10-person team doesn't now work for a 30-person team and might not be right for a 50-person team. So you have a whole lot of inefficiencies in the business that may not be optimal. I think one example we've seen is there was a manufacturer CNC shop and they worked with printed pages. And as each person did their part of the job order, they would update it on the pages. And at the end of the day, someone would reconcile all the pages back to the work orders and then input into the system. And I think that's something that can work once you're a 3, 5, 10, 15-person team. But this was now a 50-person team and was able to make the investment into software. So making that investment into software drove a whole lot of efficiencies because now you don't need people to spend time reconciling and looking through and making sure that everything that was recorded accurately.
Oh, that's neat. Yeah. And going back as well, kind of to your point about, how owner dependent the sales processes or even the business day-to-day operations are, how much would you say like customer concentration or owner dependency will discount a valuation?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's no hard and fast rule here. Like
Of
with
course.
with everything in business valuation, buying a business, it depends.
Hmm.
So I think both can reduce valuation and both can end up being a deal killer. But the one thing I would say to business owners is sometimes concentration happens and you can't avoid it. Like you wouldn't say to someone, decline your biggest client ordering more from you because now all of a sudden they're 40% of your revenue. But the trick is really how do you reduce your operational risk? So do you have multiple projects with them? Do you have different relationships with some of their team members? So you're not just relying on one person within the organization. Are you a contractually exclusive supplier for something? So I think all of those things, the way you can de-risk it is more important than the fact that it exists. And then I think owner dependency also, it's how much do you move off your plate as soon as possible before transitioning. So start with simple things that you don't really need to be involved in. And then you get to a point where your role is a single defined role so that if you were to leave the business and sell it to the new owner is clear that either I need to be the new salesperson or the new growth person, or I need to hire someone that is going to be that person. Um, I think it's really around how do you reduce the risk of those things becoming an issue.
No, I agree with you, Zahid. And you mentioned that, there's no perfect business. Like Shayla and I always say, you've seen one business, you've seen one business. There's no, pattern of this, although
Yeah.
you do look for key things on this. And at times, there's an earnout for an owner, and sometimes it's critical for the owner to stay on board during the transition, particularly if someone who's acquiring the business doesn't have those um, institutional knowledge or the relationships within a business, right? That are required for a transition. Is there a balance, or is there a point where you look for in a business, that benefits both sides, like an equilibrium, if you will, or inflection point for owners staying on and getting involved, and how to structure that from both sides so it de-risks the business? We talked about risk earlier, and one of the risks is, you know, owner dependency. However, this is the flip side of that. Sometimes it's a risk if the owner vacates too early. So maybe if you could speak to that from your perspective.
Yeah. I think it's always tricky to keep owners beyond the sale date. And the reason it's always tricky is because you're moving from a buyer-seller relationship to a partner relationship. And that requires like a new understanding of each other, a new working relationship. So as as simple as it sounds, you need to really understand this person. You need to have a lot of lunches, a lot of dinners with them. You need to be very comfortable that you want to work day in and day out with this person. But going there, the guardrails that you can put up is really you need to make sure you have clear swim lanes. So who's in
Hmm.
charge of what, who has which roles, what are the expectations going forward, but also what does this mean? Is this a 6 month transition? Is this a 2 year transition? Is this a 5 year transition? How do you lay that out at the outset and really put guardrails so that this is how it ramps up or ramps down or whatever the case may be. And then the other thing that you would do is, how do you think about incentive alignment? So if the plan is growth and you want to buy them out in a few years completely because they want to retire, the structure should reflect that. If the plan is they want to stay indefinitely and run the business, then the structure should reflect that. And the worst thing that you can end up with is, I would say, a situation where what you want and what the previous owner wants are two different things because the way your incentives align are completely different. And that'll just cause friction between you and the owner, and it'll erode the working relationship.
Right. And what you're speaking to there is company culture too. So it's a very tricky balance, right? Maintaining the previous culture, which is what made the business successful and made it appealing for you to purchase in the first place. At the same time, not disrupting that, but at the same time, having a new owner in there. So it is a balance in place there. And quite often for the new owners, what we've seen in our work is that they want to roll up their sleeves. It's exciting and get down to work and have hands-on execution in a business, right? But, what we really value at Value Driver is that we not only provide planning and understanding where businesses are to get them to the point they want to be, whether it's growing or selling or whatever the case may be, but the actual implementation piece is critical. If you could share with us some thoughts on what hands-on execution looks like, or some best practices for the first 6 to 12 months. So your first, 90, 180, and 365 days in the new job, if you will, of owner. What do you think that entails from your perspective?
Yeah. So I think it comes down to learn, learn, learn. Like in the first 2 weeks of you stepping into that business as the new owner operator, you're going to learn more than you learned in your entire 3 or 6 months of due diligence. And everything that you thought you knew, you're either going to figure out, I didn't know it deeply enough, or I misunderstood it. But those are the only two things that you will learn. There's nothing in the business that you will think, this is exactly what I thought it was. Um, and so I think you just need to be focused on learning, take your ideas of what you think can be improved or fixed, and spend the first 3 to 6 months just working with the team, building relationships, learning, and understanding why they happen that way. Because someone made that decision at some point, and this is why it happens this way. Now, there may be nuance and it may be the right thing, and you may have misunderstood, or it may be your external eyes are providing your external view is helpful and you can see a way to improve it. But unless you spend 3 months just observing, you're not going to know which one of those two things is true. And then I think in the 3 to 6 month period, you can start making changes, but don't make large changes. But really listen to your team, figure out where there's improvements that can be made. And I think this is your opportunity to make changes that are helpful to the team, where they will start trusting you, supporting you, and you'll be winning them over. So month 4, don't go and change the entire ERP system, but maybe someone from accounts payable has been telling you that they needed bank statement access, and they don't have it. Like maybe you should get them onto the bank account so that they can do their job a bit easier. Maybe one of your sales team members says he's frustrated with not having a company card, because he's continuously on the road. So I think those are changes you can make that are relatively easy and will start buying you, will improve your reputation with the team. And then around 6 to 12 months, you can start affecting larger changes once you have the team on your side and people can really see where you're going. And I think more importantly, you truly understand the business on a deeper level.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I love about this, and it comes full circle to what we talked about earlier, is the core of this is people. So that people, culture, talent piece is so important. And having that at the center of your decision making early and not changing systems or tactics early without involving with people, that's what sustains strong business, by nurturing that over time. Because too much too soon is a shock to a system. And then might have people fleeing. And in some cases, we've seen it where actually people leave and they become a competitor of yours, right? Because
Yeah.
they do have that knowledge. You're new in this position, right? So I think it's really important for retaining that talent. And I think you've addressed that really well, with, the importance of this people and culture at the core of this. If we were to draw the analogy of this being concentric circles, just to take care of people first, and then, the relationships, the culture, and then culture's involved in all of it, but then how that informs your decision-making going forward. Not that you have to involve everybody in every decision, but at least you listen to people at the start, which then helps to inform that and communicating with them along the way. So I think that's really, really smart, and it demystifies the business. It gets those myths out of the way of what's there. So I think that's really insightful. Thank you for sharing that, Sid.
Yeah. And I think it's to that point, it's very easy to lose trust with people if you come in and just start making changes gung ho. Because effectively what you're saying is, I've never been in this business, but I know it better than you. Um, and people may get upset by that. People may take it in that way, or people may just not be willing to change. So you really need to go in there first with a relationship-driven approach, and then over time make changes. The other thing we've seen is oftentimes the things that you think you should change from the outside in, they're not going to be revolutionary things. Like you are not suddenly going to discover something unique about the way this industry works. So you'll have a few hypotheses. They'll be probably tried and true hypotheses, but going in, you'll suspect these are the ways to make them work. And it's very likely most of your employees or some of your employees have their own hypotheses around what can be changed. And most of those will probably line up. And I think that's one way of testing whether these things will be helpful, whether the changes will be helpful to make. But also, if you listen to employees and they're asking for something, and that's something you thought would make a change and improve your business, well, it's great to say to employees, yes, I will make that change for you guys. I agree with you, and you sort of win them over by making the changes that they wanted to see, as opposed to coming in top down and effecting change without consulting.
100%, Zed, and I'll leave this section with this point, is that it's almost like the extended warranty of the sale. The sale comes in, and
Yeah.
then what are you going to do after to ensure that it goes forward? So no, I love this for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, I appreciate those insights. And, I think you kind of hinted too, there are a lot of myths and, kind of misinformation out there about what succession looks like for businesses, specifically around the selling and transitions of acquisition. What are some common myths that you hear from owners or that you kind of have to educate owners on when you go through the buying process?
Yeah. So I think two key things come to mind. The first is there are a lot of people reaching out to business owners with offers to buy their business, assuming that your business is ready for sale because someone cold emailed you is not the right approach. Um, and then the second thing is just the way you manage due diligence and understanding why someone is asking things. So we know there's a lot of people reaching out. There's a lot of interest from like US private equity reaching out to businesses across Canada and saying, hey, we have this thesis in the space. We'd love to buy you. Let's have a conversation. But it doesn't mean it's always a fit. So like for us, we're very targeted in who we reach out to and how. We stick to industries we want to be in, but we try to screen for size by the number of employees. But there's always some businesses that we reach out to that once we get under the hood, it's too big or it's too small, it wasn't the right fit. So just because 5 people reached out to you doesn't mean that any of the 5 are going to be the ones to acquire your business. So really thinking about sale and succession in a structured way is important. Your business is just not ready for sale in that way because someone reached out to you without knowing anything. And then the other thing that I mentioned was understanding the diligence process. And just it is a long process, it is an arduous process. Oftentimes it can be compared to someone looking into every single aspect of your business and asking, why the hell did you do this like this? And that's how it comes across sometimes. And it's easy to get defensive and it's easy to like really think that they are insulting everything that you've built, but they're not. They're really just trying to understand why things work the way that they do and why they've been done in this way. And it helps them paint a picture of like what is going on in the business. But oftentimes it can be a bit frustrating to go through a diligence process because there are a lot of questions being asked about every single thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can only imagine. For those listening who are maybe interested in selling their business or curious about acquisition process, what would you kind of well, one, how early is that something that you should start thinking about planning for? And then what would be kind of your top 3 steps to get prepared from a buyer's perspective for these businesses if they're thinking about selling soon?
Yeah. So I think this goes back to the how long is a piece of string. So to make sure you're ready when the time comes, I think you need to be thinking about it at least 18 months before, ideally 30 months. And James, like you said earlier, this is something that happens in addition to the business. The business continues to run. So it's not as if this is going to be 100% of your time for 18 months, but there's enough happening in your business that you might have a few months where you don't do anything on the sale process. And then you need to have that ability to manage through all of that slippage. So you had a busier than expected Christmas period, or you had a busier than expected spring. All of a sudden, you weren't able to focus on the business for that month. Or maybe your daughter had a kid and you spent a month during the summer helping your children with childcare. Then all of a sudden you weren't focused on succession. Well, you need to build that buffer in because life continues to go on. And then I think the other thing that you asked was around what are the 3 preparation steps from a buyer's perspective. I think it's number 1 is how do you make yourself redundant? So the more you can remove yourself from the business and the daily operations, the stronger the business is and the better it is for eventual sale. The other thing you can do is clean up your financials and financial reporting. So just making sure that you're able to tell the story in the clearest way possible with limited complexity and everyone can understand your financial statements and what's happening. And then I think the third thing is just being clear on what your core business is. And really cleaning up your business so that the core business is as efficient as it could be. You might be doing 2 or 3 different things in your business. You might have like multiple revenue streams going on, but just understanding what the core of your business is, where the value is coming from. So if you're a manufacturing company, making sure that everything around your entire manufacturing process is as efficient, operational, and ready to go as it should be. That means documenting everything, making sure that your suppliers are all have strong agreements, things like that. So just making sure the core of your operations is as effective as it can be is a powerful trigger.
Well, that's so insightful, Zahid. And as I mentioned, we were so looking forward to this entire conversation here because this is what a great perspective it is to have from the acquirers, side of the ledger, right? So it's really important for us. So that if, our listeners are keen on this, and quite often we do have people that are interested in perhaps selling their business, but don't know who to talk to or want to speak to someone, how would they reach out to you and your team at Two Oceans Ventures? What's the best way for them to reach out to you as we close out our time in the podcast today?
Yeah. So always happy to have conversations, always happy to speak to business owners, whether it be around succession planning or if they're thinking about succession planning. You can find us at twooceansventures.com. And then my email address is zahid at twooceansventures.com. So you can reach out to me directly and we're happy to have confidential conversations.
That's wonderful, and look forward to having you again on the podcast. I think this is such a big topic and so much information to share that, we don't give it enough time and attention in just one episode, but this has been wonderful. And that's a wrap for this episode of the Value Blueprint. If this episode shifted how you think about succession or sparked conversation that you need to have in your organization, we'd love you to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, contact Zahid and his team, or share it with a fellow owner eyeing the next chapter. A huge thank you, Zahid from Two Oceans Ventures, for his insights in business acquisition from the buyer side, which is really great, and preserving legacies in business. For more episodes and resources from Value Driver, we welcome you to visit valuedriver.ca and encourage you to keep building what lasts. And we'll see you next time on the podcast. Thank you so much.